So this video is focused on the local authentication method within Passport and connecting it to React. I haven't seen a video quite like this, so I decided to try it out and put a video myself together, trying to make an extremely simple use case using the lowest amount of technology and just as little as possible, and try and describe it as well as I can. This video is going to be a little intermediate, so if it's too easy, just go ahead and play it at 1.5x speed, and if it's too difficult, just stop the video and Google any questions that you might have. I'm going to have the GitHub code in the description, so go ahead and look at that as reference afterwards, and I'm not going to change it. I'm going to make it exactly how it is in this video. But without any further ado, let's just get into the rest of the video. Alright, so what we're going to be building today is going to look like this. If I type a username in with a password, I can register a person inside of the database. Now, if I type those exact same credentials in, I can log the user in to the session. Then if I click get logged in user, I get some user data that's stored. Now, if I refresh, that still persists. But if I go incognito, it's like a new person is accessing the website, and there's no user stored in there, but they can type in the exact same credentials used and log in. So this is a full authentication method, and it's actually quite secure. And you can use this to store thousands and thousands of users inside of a database. So let's get into how to create and implement this. Okay, so inside of VS Code, I am going to open up two terminals, clicking the panel button, and on the left, I'm going to make a directory called backend, and on the right, I am going to do npx create React app and call it client. This is going to create a React app on the right, and on the left, I'm just going to cd into my directory and run npm init so that I can just create my package.json. Now I have a ton of dependencies to add here, so I'm just going to add them all in one go. So we have express, body parser, cores, mongoose, passport, passport local, cookie parser, and bcrypt.js, and express session. I had a typo here. And this is going to throw an error just because I forgot to put a space right after cores, I think. And so now I have to just pretty much give that another shot. And meanwhile, on the right, I'm having my React app just install itself, and that takes a bit of time, so I'm just pretty much letting that run in the background. So this is going to take a decent amount of time to install, and I'm just going to delete this yarn error here. As you can see, there's a yarn lock, and all of those dependencies have been installed. So inside of the backend folder, I'm going to make a file called server.js where I'm going to put all of the code that's going to run. So I have to create a start script inside of the package.json to run this file when I run npm start. So at this point, I'm adding nodemon as a dev dependency because I want the server to restart every time I save the file. So that's going to save me a ton of time. So I'm going to run nodemon server.js. Okay, so now we're good to go. So now I'm making all of my import statements, starting off with mongoose, express for our server. What's next is cores for our security, cross-origin, and then we have passport here for the entire authentication library, and we're using passport local as a strategy, so we have to import that, passport-local, and at the end tag on .strategy. Then we need, let's see, cookie parser to parse all of the cookies that we're going to be using for the authentication. What's next is bcrypt for hashing the passwords. We're importing bcrypt.js. And after this, we are going to create a variable called express session for our express sessions. And yeah, I'm just putting all of my imports in the beginning because to me it's more simple and it just gets it out of the way and makes it more organized. So now I'm going to create some middleware. So I'm going to start off with app.use, and in this case I forgot to import the body parser to parse the requests and response objects. So here I'm just going to import body parser back up at the top, and then I'm going to use that in middleware here. So I'm just going to create the app.use body parser, and there you go. These two are needed for this in particular. So once that's out of the way, we are going to move on to, let's see, just starting the server. And as you can see over here, I'm in MongoDB right now, and I just logged in. And what I need to do right now, you can use any database that you'd like for this example, any at all. But you're going to want to press build a cluster and just do everything free. So just do the free tier and press create cluster. So that way we have a cluster to connect to and to put all of our users inside. If you don't know how to do that, just Google it, but MongoDB is one of the easiest databases to use out there. So I'm calling session, but I'm forgetting that I called it express session, so I'm going to have to change the variable import name at the top, but it's all the same. Just putting a secret in here, putting resave to true, and then as you can see, I notice that my variable is misspelled up here at the top, and I changed this name to session. So let's see, I think that the other thing that I have to put inside of session is save uninitialized and put that to true. So whatever you call this secret inside of the session, you're going to need to use in your cookie parser. So I'm going to be using, oh, well, of course, let me do cores first. So cores is one of the most important things about this entire project. So I'm creating a middleware for cores, and I'm putting the origin to whatever the React app that we're using. So in this case, it's localhost 3000 because it's not hosted, it's just on our local host. But this part inside of cores is the most important. If you don't do this, nothing is going to work inside of the authentication. And make sure you have credentials to true inside of the configuration object. So now we're back into what I was saying, the cookie parser here. Use that same secret that you have in the session for the cookie parser as a parameter. So hopefully what I'm doing here isn't too complicated. If it is, you might want to just slow down, pause it, Google some questions, and just come back. If it's too easy, this is a good thing because it doesn't get much more difficult than this. So I'm making my routes here. I'm starting off with a post request. I'm just going to console log the request.body, so whatever they send to the route, I'm just going to go ahead and log it. I'm going to make a register request, a post request for register, a post request for login, and a get request for user. And I hope that is just as simple as I can get it. So we're going to have a login route, a register route, and a get user route. Just some simple express stuff there. So now that that's done, I'm going to go ahead and just move into the React app because this is all I need to practically begin creating with my React app. And I'm just going to come back to this backend once I've added some code to my front end. Okay, so now I'm going to open up app.js over here, and I need to clear out this file because it's super unorganized, and I just want to start off with just getting it down to an empty div. So I'm going to go ahead and just erase a bunch of the code that's inside here. I just deleted the logo on the left inside of the src folder, but let's get this down to an empty div. And the structure of how this is going to be is I'm going to pretty much, let's see, over in the terminals I just pretty much ran yarn start on the left and yarn start on the right, so my React app is running simultaneously with my backend file. So now that it's down to an empty div, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create my register, my login, and my get user all in the same file. You do not have to do this at all. It's just because I wanted to make the tutorial as simple as possible. So now I'm starting off by just making a div and putting my register inside of it. So I need an input for username and an input for password. So I'm going to do that for register, and I'm going to also do that for login, where I have an input for username and an import for the password. So right here I goofed. I forgot to put that brace there, so I was a little confused, but back on track. We have the username and the password. Now, basic React is that as you type, you want to store what the user is typing into the state so that you can use it on all kinds of calls. So what I'm going to do here is go back up to the top and create some state. So I'm creating state for register username, set register username, and I'm going to do the same thing for password. I'm going to do register password and set register password, so that I can just store the values of whatever the client is typing into some state, so that when I click register, I can go ahead and send that off to the back end. Hopefully that's simple enough and it's not confusing. If it is, then just watch some simple React, or just Google why people store their inputs inside of state. I'm doing the same thing for login username, and set login username, login password, set login password. I'm just knocking out all of the state at once to get things out of the way. And now over here inside of the inputs, I'm going to, let's see, first of all, I'm going to create a button, and I'm just going to make it say submit, so that when I click the button, I'm going to fire off the function to register it. So a little copy and paste here. I'm going to do the same exact thing for login as I'm doing with register, and the div below it will just be for getting the user. So I have register, login, and get user, and they all have submit buttons. So now I need to create an on change event, and on change I'm going to get an E as a parameter, which means event, and then I'm going to set register username to whatever the event.target.value is. Hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, then that's another simple React thing that you probably want to catch up on. But this is just going to store whatever the user is typing into the inputs into the state. So feel free to pause the video and Google how this works. So really fast paced here. I'm going inside of the buttons, and on click of them, I want to fire off a function that is going to run the register method, run the login method, and run the get user method. So I haven't created those yet, so I'm creating them here. So here's an arrow function for register, here's an arrow function for login, and here is an arrow function for get user. And upon fired, they're going to run all of the logic to send it off to the back end, so that we can actually log in, register, and get the current user. So now I'm just going to go ahead and go back up to localhost 3000, and it's going to look like this. And this is all we need. So now that that's done, check it out. I'm installing Axios on my client directory, because Axios is used to make the HTTP requests that we need for this project. So we got Axios installed, and I'm just going to run yarn start right afterwards. So now that that's done, inside of my register, login, and get users, I need to run an Axios instance. Here, first of all, let me import it up at the top. Import Axios from Axios. So right here, I'm just running Axios. It's a parameter and then a configuration object. I'm putting the method to post, and the data is going to be an object with username and password inside of it. So I have username set to register username, password set to register password, the state values that I have up at the top. So when a user types their input in and they press submit, it's going to ship off that data there, and with credentials to true. Axios is a good GitHub and a good documentation on how this works, but this is some simple Axios stuff here. So just making a post request to the register route on localhost 4000, and then after it's been posted, I am going to get a promise and just console log the return statement. So right now I'm just doing Nathaniel and 123 as a test, and if I go back into Visual Studio Code, I get the username and password there. So I'm just going to copy and paste this Axios function here to right below it for my login, and I'm just going to post the login username and the login password to localhost 4000/login, the location of the backend login route. And then on get user, I'm copy and pasting it as well, but it's going to be a get request. There's not going to be any data sent with it. And the URL I'm going to be shipping to is -get user. This is actually a typo I'll have to fix later, but it's fair enough. So back into MongoDB, press the connect button, press the middle, connect the application, or get the connection string like I did, and make sure you have a database user that that you can connect to. Now I'm going to go back into the backend and use that connection string I just copied, and I'm going to run mongoose.connect, and I'm just going to paste the connection string in there. Now in this password bracket, change it, just delete that and change it to whatever your password is for your database user. Not your login user, but your database user. Right after that, second parameter is an object with some tweaks here that I don't even know what they do, but they'll get pissed at me if I don't add them. So I'm just going to add the configuration there. And the third parameter is just going to be a callback function that says Mongoose is connected. So again, pretty simple backend stuff here, just connecting to MongoDB, nothing crazy. Now we need to make a user schema for MongoDB. So I got a user file, and I'm doing const mongoose equals require mongoose, and I just need to make a user schema so that I can actually post users to the database. So I have const user equals new mongoose.schema, username will be a string, and password will be a string. That's all we're going to store in the database is a username and password. Then after that, I'm going to do modules.exports, user uppercase U, and just put that user variable in there. And that's all you need. That simple little file is all you need to throw users in that database left and right, all you like, all over the place. So now after that, let's go back into our register route, and let's make a little test. Okay, I'm going to do user.find1. I'm going to look for somebody with the same username as the request.body.username, so the username that gets posted to the route. And then afterwards, I'm going to get an error or a document as a callback function. So if there's an error, I'm just going to throw the error. But if there is a document, it means there's already somebody registered in the database with the same username. So let's just go ahead and do a res.send user already exists, because yeah, and if there is no document, then let's create a new user. So I got const new user equals new user, uppercase. And inside of the configuration object, I'm going to put the username to request.body.username, password to request.body.password. So whatever is getting posted to the route, we are going to store as a user. And then I need to make this async and await the user getting saved. And then once it's been saved to the database, res.send user created. Got a little error here. Module.exports is not a function. Yeah. So I wrote this a little wrong. It's module.exports equals mongoose.model, and then I pass it as a parameter. So goofed up there a little bit, but there we go. Everything is going to work now. Now I can actually post a user to the database in the simplest fashion. So upon pressing submit, I got a user created as my response from the client. So let's go check out the collections, and we should see a user inside of there. And we do, but the password is stored as a plain text, and this is very bad. So let's go back in the server and let's hash that password so we don't have the plain text password in there, because if we get a data breach, then thousands of passwords get stolen, and you end up on the news. So let's not end up on the news. Let's run bcrypt.hash. Let's put the password in there that the client is sending, and let's put 10 as the salt. And let's change the password in the database to whatever the hashed password is from bcrypt. I'm going really fast here. I'm so sorry. Please just pause the video when you need to. But check it out. Made a new user, 123, password of 123. Then I got an error, and I'm not sure why. So yeah, that's why. I forgot to put in await. So we need to await bcrypt.hash, because that takes a couple seconds to hash the password. Now we're going to get that user with that hash password. So now we are creating users, and we're hashing their passwords, and life is good, and we can move on to the login, because we can infinitely create users at this point. There is no stopping how many users in this database. So curious what I'm doing right here. Right, so I'm creating a new file called passport config, and this is going to be all of the configuration that I'm going to be using for passports, so that I can actually authenticate a user. So let's go. We got the user import up at the top, so we have our user schema that we're connecting to. I'm importing bcrypt so that I can unhash passwords, and I'm importing local strategy from Passport. So with all those imports done, we are going to write module.exports equals function passport. So we're going to get a parameter passed to this function when we call it, and it's going to be the passport library, because we want to use the same instance of passport throughout our entire application. So that's how we're going to do it. Now we're going to use passport.use new local strategy. So what we're doing right now is we are pretty much defining our local strategy for Passport, so that every time we use the local strategy, it's going to run this local strategy that we're defining right now. So when we run it, we're going to get a username, a password, and a done parameter. And the username is essentially the request.body.username. The password is the request.body.password that we get passed to it when we run the login route. And the done is pretty much a callback function that says, hey, we're done with this step, let's move on to the next step. Let's pretty much continue. So, well, like I said, we're just defining the local strategy. We're not calling anything or running anything, we're just defining it. So with all that said, we're pretty much just going to want to look up the user in the database. So we're going to do user.find1. Whoever has a username matching the request.body.username, or essentially the parameter we're getting passed to it. So username matching username. If it's successful, we're going to get an error or a user. If there's an error, we're going to want to throw it. And if there's a user, then we are pretty much just, oh, check this out. If there's no user, we're going to want to return the done method with null and false. So null is the error and false is the user. So we have no error, but there's no user. So that's how it pretty much works. So after this, we're going to want to say, if there's a user, let's compare with bcrypt the password that's passed. So pretty much the request.body.password with the password that's stored in the database. So we're going to get an error and a result when this is called. And if there's an error, we're going to want to throw it. And if the result is true, we're going to want to return that user. So if result is equal to true, we're going to want to run the done function. And we're going to want to pass null as the error and the user as the user. So we are returning a user now. So right under this, I'm just going to return done with pretty much no user, because this means that the comparison failed. So the password is not the same. So this is pretty much all you need. Like I said, we're just defining a local strategy. So now that that's done, we need to move on to the serialize user and deserialize user aspect of the authentication method. So Passport requires a serialize user and deserialize user. The serialize user function stores a cookie inside of the browser. So we pretty much want to take the user that we got from our local strategy, and we just want to create a cookie with the user ID inside of it, and you do it just the way that I showed you. Now deserialize user right here pretty much takes that cookie and unravels it and returns a user from it. So what we need to do for that is take the ID as the first parameter, because we're deserializing a cookie, and the callback is how we're going to return it. So we're going to want to return, we pretty much want to find the user in the database with the ID matching the cookie's ID. So we do that by doing underscore ID that matches the ID. If it's successful, we'll get an error and a user. If there's an error, we want to throw it, but if there is a user, we want to just return the callback with the user, which pretty much just says, hey, here's the user. We've deserialized it from the cookie. This is all that you need inside of this file to authenticate users using a route. This is it. So that's all you need. It's a little confusing at first, but after a while, everything will make sense, and it'll be quite practical. So let's go back into our middleware. Let's go to the bottom of it, and we need some things to make this fully functional. One of the things we need is to create a new middleware that pretty much initializes Passport. And then another one which initializes the session part of Passport. Like that. And then after this, I'm just going to require the file we just created, and I'm going to pass the instance of Passport that we've been using as the parameter. So notice how we're using the same instance of Passport throughout the entire server. This is how you do it, how I showed you. So we could have wrote everything in one file, but I separated it, and because I think that if you can understand it as complex as it is in this one, I think that you can really make it quite intricate. I'm just doing some cleanup here. But after this is all done, we just pretty much need to go to our login route and implement the local strategy that we just defined in the other file. So just doing some cleanup. So now let's enter the login route that we just created, and I'm pretty much just going to want to use the local strategy that we defined. and try and authenticate people. So let's see. Here we go. Back into the login route. And we're going to run passport.authenticate. Check this out. We're going to use the string local, and it's going to automatically use the local strategy that we defined in that file we just created. So we get error, user, and info as a callback. So notice how we placed this inside of the route. So it's going to take our request.body.username, request.body.password, and it's going to pass it to the strategy. So inside of passport.authenticate local, if there's an error, we're going to throw it. If there's no user, we're going to send to the browser no user exists. But if there is a user, it means that we are successfully authenticated because it's ran our entire file that compared the passwords and everything. Okay, and now I'm going to want to log the user in here. So I'm going to do request.login. I'm going to log in the user that I got back from the authentication method. And if there's an error, I'm going to throw it, but I'm going to res.send success. And now we are done. We have successfully authenticated. And this is all that you need. This is literally it. So a lot of it is confusing at first, and I was really confused at first, but everything will eventually make sense. So I'm actually going to go back up to the route, and I'm going to go to where I have the request and a response, and I'm going to add next as a parameter, which just means to move on to the next route. Now, I'm not sure why I'm doing this, but I just found that it works. So let's come back down and put request, response, and next. So this was fast and quite confusing, but this is it. And this is all that you need to authenticate users. So back on React, I can literally just log somebody in and it'll say successfully authenticated. And that's it. But I have some errors here on the client side. My get user route needs to return the request.user. So the request.user stores the entire user inside of it. So the entire user is stored in request.user. And we can use that in all of our application to pretty much authenticate somebody and use that data. So now I'm going to come back into my login and I'm going to try one more time, but you're going to see an error because I accidentally, so it's authenticated and it's working, but I accidentally in Axios on the client side called it get user, and I'm highlighting it here when it's actually just user. That's what I called the route. I didn't make a route called get user. So I'm going to actually go back into React and I'm going to change my route name to just user in Axios when I press that button, because I did call it by the wrong name. So now let's try it again. I'm logging in and you'll see successfully authenticated, and the data is going to be the entire user I passed in MongoDB, or not in the Passport authentication method. But check this out. So what I'm going to do now is, let's say I'm going to go back into the Passport config, and I think I'm like looking for it right now. Oh, I see. Yeah. So I'm going to do a few things before I do that. I'll get to that later. I'm going to do data and set data, and I'm going to just create them as state, and I'm going to take the data that I'm getting from the server, and I'm just going to pretty much save it inside of state so that I can use it later in my application. So when I press the button, I'm just going to save the data as state. And down here, right below get user, I'm just going to say if there's a data.username, that's an if statement, then I'm going to want to just return an h1 with the data.username. So I'm going to do welcome back and just put data.username. And it's going to take the username that's passed from the object to the client side. So I changed it from data.username to just data. I'm going to empty out my log, and try it again. So I can log in, authenticate, and there we go. I have my data stored in state. And I can refresh the page and the session persists. Now if I go in an incognito like I'm a new user, it's not there anymore. And a new user can log in and you can make a new account and log in with it and get the user. So it's extremely scalable. That's why this difficult authentication method is, well, it's not difficult, it's just confusing at first. It's why it's so nice is that it's extremely scalable and practical, and you can use it for so many different things. You can create your entire application off of this. So now what I'm going to do is what I was talking about earlier, and I was a little cut off. Okay, so I'm going to pretty much just, I'm going to save the data in state, but I'm also going to console log the actual result, the response, because I just want to see what it's getting sent. So check out when I press submit, how I get the response back from the server of what is being sent. So now let's go back into Passport config. And let's go to the serialized user or the deserialized user. And let's take the callback, how it's returning an error in the user. And check this out, you can only send certain data back. So you can do user information. I'm just going to create a new object, and it's going to only store the username from the user I'm getting from MongoDB, because I'm doing find one. I'm going to only store the username. And I'm going to use the callback method again, but instead of passing the user, I'll just pass the user information. So this way you can make just objects that hold only so much data inside of them. So check out now when I go ahead and I log in and I press submit. Check out how it's only sending back the username object, or the user information object. So you can restrict data this way, and overall this is the entire method for authentication with React and Passport. So I get that this was a bit tricky and it might have been a bit confusing, but especially the Passport section. But after reading some good documentation and getting a comprehensive view, I really hope that you can use this to your advantage in creating really awesome full stack applications that use Passport, and you can really take this as far as you like. You can build huge things with this. But anyway, this is the entire authentication method. Let me know if you'd like any more details or any videos about expanding this into a huge project, just to show you that it's possible. But anyway, this is the local authentication method. Thank you for watching, and have a nice day.